Please welcome Dee, Ryder and Taussig to the stage, the producers of McQueen. Thank you both for this film. We have time for a short Q&A, and we'd love to involve you, the audience, too. So please do raise your hand when you have a question. Thank you for the film. It's really detailed and really aesthetically strong portrait of Lee's life. Why now? How did you get access to this incredibly rich archive that is ranging from personal video to really high-end footage of his fashion shows? Did it take so long to get that material together, or was there a moment where you managed to convince the family to give that?
Yeah, we're laughing actually because we actually, when we first decided to make it, we didn't have any access at all. So we winged it, to be honest with you. Initially, we went to the estate, we went to the brand, and the brand respectfully declined to participate, which was a blessing, because I think that with a film like this, you want editorial independence. So actually, in hindsight, we sat there and thought, okay, we've got the money, we have no access, what do we do? So it was a slow process of kind of ingratiating ourselves in that inner circle and realizing, I suppose, the politics within that circle and who would talk and who wouldn't. And but I think, like all documentaries, it was just a fight. It was a hard fight just to get the access, and then lots and lots of archive research, endless research. But I think in a way we got lucky. It's that thing where, sometimes there's an alchemy in the process of filmmaking where things kind of come together. And it helped also that we had Peter Otegui, because Peter, he's from that world. His father was Joseph, the fashion retailer. So he had an understanding of that whole culture. So yeah.
And then also, yeah, when you just, like you probably all know as documentarians, but you just get certain nuggets that come along, certain things, and there was someone who didn't want to be on camera but wanted to provide us with some archive, which was because Ian and Peter's intention was always to try and tell the film in his own words, and then we got the archive from Tim Blanks, which is the audio which was used over the skull motif a lot of time, and that was a real breakthrough, because there was a significant amount of Lee's own words that we could use to tell the story, and that was a real big step. And then there was another big step that we got was amazing, and then all the audio was terrible, so we couldn't use any of it, which was a big step backwards. But yeah, as with archive, it's like a treasure hunt, and you get some stuff. And there was Mira Chai, who's the American Filipino woman. We were filming her in LA, and she just, when we were about to leave, said, "Oh, by the way, I might have some footage." And then we went through, and she had this 3 hours DVD of just incredible footage of Lee that no one had seen before. So.
Wow. And was it kind of stages of, were you putting together material, or Peter and Ian, proving the kind of aesthetic trajectory of the film, and then going back to find further characters? At what point were the family members within the film convinced that, this is a project that they trust, and this is a project that they want to be part of, and that is really representative of Lee?
It was a similar first response to what the brand had. We went to the brand and went to the family, like everyone does with access, and you try and get the key players in straight away, and the family just said no, quite bluntly straight away. And then we came back 6 weeks later.
Excuse me. Like, did you actually know the family? Like, I have to ask you guys. You have to stop. Like, did you actually know the McQueen family at all?
No.
Okay, so neither one of you knows the McQueen family.
No.
At all.
No.
So most of the footage you got is from like footage that you found, basically.
Yes, yeah. All the archive is obviously, it's archive research. Yeah, we found it all through through thick and thin, through a lot of, talking to different contacts, talking to different people who didn't want to be on the camera. They might have some people was from fashion houses who had obviously all the runway footage.
But it is evident throughout the movie that you don't know the family at all. So.
Okay.
I wouldn't get that.
Yeah, I'm not really sure.
So I think it's an opinion.
Yeah, thank you.
So fair enough, you're entitled.
Facts, obviously.
Fact.
Okay, it's yeah. We'll carry on with questions on stage and open up to questions from the audience afterwards. But yeah, if you have an opinion, we can chat outside about opinions. But please do open it to dialogue in the room apart from opinions. So I would like to know a little bit about Lee's life. He was part of a generation within the UK, including people like Damien Hirst, Tracy Emin, who really were all Brits in that case. Liam Gallagher, you might say, is part of that 90s generation too, who had this same strange kind of like coming from the working class background and really taking on the world with bravado, but with really leading in culture at that time. Where do you think that came from within his generation? Where do you think that spirit really came from?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question actually. I mean, I think that's what makes his story so great for film. And in one sense, we didn't have to do a lot because the fact that he came from nothing and had that God-given talent, and that he had that amazing trajectory in his career where he reached such sort of creative excellence at such a young age, and then had the downfall. We tried to harness the film around that very human story of kind of genius followed by tragedy. I think he says it on camera where I suppose there was a better functioning welfare state when he was in his teens, and so obviously he was using his dole money and other things. He was more he was able to be more resourceful with money than we are now, and I mean there was something quite unique about that period. I suppose it was kind of. In a way, I suppose he was one of Thatcher's children, wasn't he? In terms of his age, I mean, he's that generation. But yeah, I mean, I think it's. We've back to the family, and what we found was that with all documentary subjects, there's a lot of conflict within. You had three camps. You had the brand, you had the family, and then you had Saraband, which is a charitable foundation that Lee set up when he died to enable other young, struggling, aspiring artists and designers to become designers like him. And there was a lot of tension and distrust between these three entities. And so it's that usual thing where you're trying to... The only thing we could do was to essentially not take sides with anyone, talk to all three entities. And we just found that it was a family that wanted to talk to us most of all. It just happened that way. I think probably because they realised that it was a film which was about him, not about selling more clothes. So it wasn't a brand film. So yeah, that's kind of how it evolved.
And his relationship with Isabella I find particularly interesting. And obviously there's a moment where he rejected, or maybe not rejected, distance himself from that relationship to maybe be in his own limelight a little bit more. Why do you feel that? Was that also motivated by finance? There's a little bit of a hint in there that money was a reasoning for that.
I think it was as the film suggests an element of wanting to move out on his own potential. Resentment's the wrong word, but he, to try and be his own person, to grow away from Izzy, and it was just sometimes we all do that, and sometimes we outgrow each other creatively around there, and we have to move on. It doesn't mean we're not friends and we don't respect those people anymore. And I think that's what Lee really had to do for himself. He had to go on and find and spread those wings somewhere else. And Isabella had been incredibly helpful to him and many other people. But for him, that was a new step in his path, was to move on without Isabella. And I think he just probably made the right decision. But it was obviously, maybe it was done. It was awkward the way it was done, and obviously it made fractions in their friendship. But they still did remain friends. It was just difficult after that, I think, because there was, like anything like that, people can be hurt. It's difficult to recover from that.
Mm. And he did seem to, creatively flourish after that moment. But I got the sense that what he lost was that sense of security and somebody who was his kind of early mentor. Do you think that was one of the reasons for his kind of his own personal breakdown? This loss of like the things that built him up were suddenly kind of leaving him. His mother obviously getting ill towards the end of the film. I just wondered what you felt happened to the safety structure and the thing that brought him up for him not to be secure towards the end of his life.
I think, if I'll pass it on to you in a second, rabbiting away, but I think he'd obviously had a tough childhood. What happened to him was, believing in strong foundations as a child, and obviously he had good family and mum and dad, but it was very obviously tragic what happened when he was young. And unfortunately, although he was trying, he just never really was able to actually stop and actually take a breath, And obviously the film does focus on mental health a little bit, and he was trying to get out. We know about times he actually applied to do a master's course in fine art in San Francisco and go away for a year and take a sabbatical. And he'd actually talked to the brand about it, but he still, when it came back to it, he still always felt, as he says, the name was above the door, and he just found it very difficult to actually stop. And he was a workhorse, like a lot of sometimes overrated people, very talented people. It was a hobby as well as a job, and a profession. But he probably did need some time out to work through, his what he'd gone through when he was young and his mental health thing. But unfortunately, he was never able to really recognise that.
I'd love to open to audience questions at this point, and encourage dialogue, not facts, from audience members. So, please do ask a question.
Thank you very much. The film was really beautiful. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I was just wondering how you got the finance and had no access at all.
Good question.
So the question for anybody who didn't hear was how they managed to get finance without having secured access prior to that.
We didn't. When do you want to? Because I've been talking it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was partly timing, because we'd made a couple of big films the year before, Salon, and so I think it was just about we were in a strong position to bring more money to a film. I also think that when we first came out with the idea, it was us. I used to work in distribution before I worked in production, and there are a handful of household names in the UK that you can build theatrical films around. I mean, and I say a handful. I think there's like 30 or 40, and this name had always been on a list of ours, and it was one of those names we kind of thought, okay, why has nobody done this yet? There's been a few TV films with limited budgets, not quite enough resource. So it was just that it was obvious that the demand was there for it, and so we just leveraged those existing relationships from other films we'd done, because we do dramas as well, bigger stuff, and so that's how we did it. But it was a gamble. It's a usual thing in this business, is that you think you know what you're doing, you haven't got a clue, and you just you kind of make it up as you go along.
Yeah. It's another thing as well. Actually, we were actually talking about this just a minute ago, and we're saying in this case it would have been. I don't know if we'd have waited to get access, we'd have probably never made the film, because we'd have never got it, because everyone just said no straight away, and it was only through perseverance and 6-8 months, 9 months. The family had a question we didn't quite fully answer earlier, but the family, only came in right at the end, and I'm sorry, the person who's left seemed to think their family, we didn't know them. We didn't know them before we made the film, but we do have a very good relationship with them now because we've grown up. They grew to trust us, because we were never trying to make a film other than to celebrate Lee's life and what he brought to us. But yeah, it was. It would have been difficult to just try and get the access first, so we just sort of ploughed ahead with blind belief, maybe. I suppose it kind of paid off. But,
do we have another question? There's a gentleman just behind you to the back there.
Well, it was just following up on that clarifies a lot, because when the woman across here said it was evident from the film that you didn't know the family, to me, as I said, it wasn't evident at all. So touching on that part of making documentaries and archiving and the integrity of telling a story and being truthful to it, there is an element of interpretation inevitably. And to me, it seemed as though you had gained the trust and an integrity. So I was surprised initially when you said you didn't know the family when the woman was asking about it. But, I mean, how do you reconcile, well, can you reconcile those tensions? You've talked about it, which is fascinating, and maybe that's sufficient. But to me, you knew the family, and that was in the documentary. So is that correct?
Sorry, it was a question, do we...
Yeah, so you did know the family, because you just said you had that trust with the family, so you had an integrity in your interpretation of that side of the film.
Yeah, I maybe misinterpreted the question. I thought she was asking me if we knew the family beforehand, which we didn't at all.
Yeah, right, and I think that's unfortunate, because you obviously do know the family.
Yeah,
you got
yeah.
their trust completely.
But we got
and
to know.
that came across in the film, which is why I said to me, it doesn't. I didn't agree with her, but anyway. Yeah.
No, thank you. Appreciate it. No, it grew as we went along, because we didn't know them at all before. And Ian and Peter didn't know them at all. It was, but they were fans of Lee McQueen and wanted to make a film about him. And then, as they went along, obviously they had tighter and tighter relationships with them, and we grew their trust. So.
I think there was another question just down here at the front.
Hi, thank you for it. That was amazing. That was a roller coaster ride, I think, and very beautiful and very moving. Congratulations. Thank you. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that transition of how you went from getting a no to eventually, like, what did you take to them and say, no, we are serious, we are genuine, if we'd love you to join us. I know you said no, but now will you say yes because we'd like to do this? Could you talk a little about that transition, because that's the key kind of gear flip?
Well, I think with the family, it was probably when they realised that we weren't working with the brand because they hate the brand. So it's because I think they felt quite betrayed by the brand after Lee's death and what happened subsequently. So I think it's often like a slow courtship. It's a bit like dating. You speak and you don't speak and you speak. And I think that, I think it got to a point, it was Gary and Janet, and it got to a point where they finally just sort of said, we're willing to participate. But I think the big thing was had we been working with any of the other two entities, they wouldn't have agreed to help us. So I think that that's probably what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was also, as we went along, we were able to, when we came back, every 2 months, so hi, it's us again. We were able to have a show progressing with the project, and we could show them the edit further and further progressing, and so when we came back, we could show them the edit as it was, and we if there was anyone who was particularly nervous, we actually gave them not edit sign-off of the film, of course, but approval of their sections in the film, and we would show them it at the end and say, if you don't like it, we'll change it, basically, and that maybe reassured them a little bit as well.
Yeah, and that shows in the integrity, as this gentleman said. Even if you didn't know the family beforehand, the relationship builds because the film is honest and the film is portraying Lee in a very honest light, I think. I think we've got time for one more question. I know quite a few people have their hands up, and I'm sure you can try and catch these guys outside, although it's very late. But we can take one more question from the audience, the lady just here at the back.
Yeah, and thank you all for staying so late.
Hi, I wanted to know if any of the footage was shot by McQueen.
Good question. By Lee himself?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, some of the footage, obviously, in the flat in France. Obviously, some of that was physically shot.
Some of the audio too is like kind of diary.
Yeah, that's just pure audio. I mean, just trying to think my way through the sea of archive, but that was definitely shot by Liam. Trying to think of anything else that would pop up. Anything else that he would have shot? In the car, yeah, that's the same supply as that. That was all from Simon. That was all Simon Costin stuff. I think that was all the only stuff he actually physically shot himself.
It would have made a great film, actually,
if he'd have shot it.
If he'd stayed alive.
Yeah.
It would have been a great movie director, actually.
Yeah, well, we got a text yesterday actually saying there's one of Gary Wallace who supplied a lot of our stills in the film, and for ages he was like, I've got this amazing Super 16 black and white footage that me and Lee shot together, and we were obviously trying to get this all the way through the film, and we just in the end we didn't get it in time. He texted us yesterday, so he's finally found it.
DVD extra.
Yeah, I know. I'd see Lionsgate on that. Yeah.
Well, please put your hands together for Dee and Nick.